Duchess of Malfi is a play by John Webster that was performed in 1614 by the King's Men at their theatres, the Open-Air Globe and the private indoor Blackfriars. The play was originally printed in folio form as The Tragedy of the Duchess of Malfi in 1623. This Jacobean-era Renaissance drama is a revenge tragedy and is set in the Roman Catholic Italian cities of Amalfi, Rome, Loreto, and Milan during the 16th century. For English audiences in Webster's day, the Italian ducal court symbolized corruption because of the political ideas of Niccolò Machiavelli the Prince, Italy's loyalty to the Catholic Church and the Pope, and the ruthless politics of powerful families, such as the Borgias and the Medicis, that dominated Italy and ruled the papacy. Rodrigo Borgia aka Pope Alexander VI was infamous for his mistresses and illegitimate children. The Catholic Church was driven more by power and wealth than by faith. The King of England Henry VIII from 1509 to 1547 broke from the Catholic Church to secure his divorce and form the Church of England. In the play's opening, Antonio returns from France and immediately contrasts the French court with Malfi, placing Italy, then a Catholic country, in a poor light. The revenge tragedy tradition began with the Roman dramatist Lucius Seneca. In Webster's tragedy, instead of a heroic man seeking revenge, a virtuous woman who becomes the target of revenge by corrupt, ambitious men. He also shifts the structure. The Duchess's tragic death happens in the fourth act, leaving an entire act for the aftermath. Another classic feature of revenge tragedy of real events inspiring the plot. Webster's play's main source was William Paynter's The Palace of Pleasure, a translation of an adaptation of an Italian novella. The historical Duchess, Giovanna d'Aragona, was married at 12 in 1490. She was widowed at 20, and became regent of Amalfi after her son, the new duke, was born. Her steward, Antonio Beccadelli, managed her estate, and the two secretly married and had 3 children. Her brothers, one a cardinal, had her murdered in 1510. Webster alters the facts in the play because in reality Antonio lived for several years after her death, and Bosola never repented or killed the brothers. The true perpetrators faced no justice at all. Webster forces his audience to confront scenes of brutal physical violence and psychological torment that verge on sadism. His language constantly pushes shock and horror to the front of the stage. Critics still debate his intentions. Was he merely stirring emotions for effect, denying the existence of human goodness, or trying to shake his audience awake so they might see their world with sharper moral vision? The play opens in the presence chamber of the Duchess's palace in Malfi. Delio greets his friend Antonio Bologna, newly returned from France. Antonio praises the French court for driving out corruption. Their conversation is interrupted when Daniel de Bosola arrives with the cardinal. Bosola complains that the cardinal never rewarded him for a dangerous task that cost him years as a galley slave. The cardinal dismisses Bosola as dishonest, and leaves. Frustrated, Bosola tells Antonio that Cardinal and Duke Ferdinand are corrupt, ungrateful men who used him and cast him aside. Delio tells Antonio that Bosola served 7 years in the galleys for a notorious murder, and that many believed the cardinal had hired him to do it. Antonio regrets that the cardinal's ingratitude will poison all his goodness. Delio asks Antonio to describe the main figures of the Amalfi court, but the scene quickly fills with courtiers. Ferdinand arrives with Silvio, Castruccio, Roderigo, and Griselin. Ferdinand rewards Antonio for his success in the recent jousting games. Their talk ranges from battles to Castruccio's suspected cuckoldry to Roderigo's new horse. When the cardinal enters with the Duchess of Malfi and Cariola, everyone is distracted except Antonio and Delio. Antonio quietly explains that Cardinal is outwardly charming but inwardly jealous and corrupt, while Ferdinand is violent, vengeful, and prone to twisting the law for his own ends. Antonio describes the Duchess as intelligent, gracious, and virtuous. Soon after, Cariola summons Antonio to the Duchess. Ferdinand persuades the Duchess to hire Bosola as manager of her horses, and she agrees. The brothers then decide to use Bosola as a spy on their sister. They don't want their recently widowed sister to remarry. Bosola wants no part in it, but Ferdinand pressures him with money and the promise of a position of a horse manager. Reluctantly, Bosola agrees. In the next scene, Ferdinand and the cardinal warn the Duchess not to remarry, insisting it would disgrace their family. She promises she has no intention of marrying again, but they don't believe her. Once alone, the Duchess reflects briefly on their warnings but chooses instead to act boldly. She confides in her loyal waiting woman, Cariola, and asks her to hide behind the arras and observe what follows. Antonio arrives, expecting a routine meeting, but the Duchess tells him she wishes to dictate her will. Their conversation turns to marriage, and Antonio remarks that it is either heaven or hell. Amazed, the Duchess offers him her wedding ring and proposes to him, knowing his lower status would never allow him to propose first. Antonio accepts, and Cariola steps out to bear witness, making their union binding. The Duchess sends Cariola away so she may withdraw with Antonio to plan how to win her brother's acceptance. Left alone, Cariola wonders whether the Duchess is soaring toward greatness or stepping into dangerous folly. Inside the Duchess's palace apartment, Bosola teases Castruccio for dreaming beyond his abilities. An old lady arrives, and Bosola mocks her aging face and the cosmetics she uses to hide it. When the old lady and Castruccio leave, Bosola wonders if the Duchess might be pregnant. He bought the year's first apricots, fruit rumored to trigger labor, and plans to test his suspicion. Antonio enters with Delio, having confessed his secret marriage and warns Delio never to repeat it. They join Bosola, and Antonio remarks that Bosola tries too hard to look humble and gloomy since his promotion. The Duchess appears, breathless, and jokes about her plumpness. Bosola offers her the apricots. She eats them and immediately feels unwell, retreating to her chamber. Antonio and Delio realize she has gone into labor and decide to hide the truth by claiming that Bosola poisoned her. Elsewhere, Bosola is convinced that the apricots have confirmed his suspicion. The old lady rushes in again, and after enduring more insults from Bosola, runs off, likely to help with the Duchess's childbirth. Antonio, Delio, Roderigo, and Griselin arrive. Antonio claims the Duchess's jewels are missing and orders the court gates locked. A group of gossiping servants mention a rumor of a Swiss mercenary in the Duchess's bedroom. Antonio commands all officers to remain locked in their rooms and send in their keys, using the false theft and her supposed illness to cover the birth. When the others leave, Antonio sends Delio to Rome to watch over the Duchess's brothers. Delio reassures him before departing. Cariola enters with the newborn son, and Antonio is overwhelmed with joy. Late that night, Bosola prowls outside the palace with a lantern, unsettled by the cry he thought he heard from the Duchess. Antonio appears with his sword drawn. Bosola claims not to hear anything from the Duchess's quarters. Antonio claims he is calculating a horoscope for the supposed theft and pretends Bosola might be the thief, since the Duchess fell ill after eating his apricots. Antonio suddenly gets a nosebleed, a bad omen, and leaves. Bosola finds a paper Antonio dropped, the baby's horoscope, predicting a short and violent life. Now Bosola knows the Duchess has given birth and that Antonio is involved, but he doesn't realize that Antonio is the father. He plans to send word tomorrow to her brothers in Rome. In the Cardinal's Roman palace, Julia, his mistress and Castruccio's wife, explains that she convinced her husband to let her travel alone. She frets about the Cardinal's loyalty, but he dismisses her jealousy as projection. A servant announces a messenger from Malfi. Julia's former suitor Delio enters and politely offers her money, perhaps to keep her friendly. Another servant comes in with news that Castruccio has arrived in Rome and has handed Ferdinand a letter that sent him into a rage. After the servants leave, Delio asks Julia to become his mistress. She responds teasingly, leaving her intentions unclear. Delio fears that Ferdinand may have learned about the Duchess and Antonio. In another room in the Roman palace, Ferdinand storms in holding a letter. He tells the cardinal that the Duchess is pregnant. He doesn't know she is married. Ferdinand rants about women's supposed faithlessness and vows destruction on everyone involved. The cardinal, cold and controlled, scolds Ferdinand for losing his reason. Ferdinand swears he will act only once he has uncovered the identity of the child's father and leaves in a fury. Some time has passed. Delio newly returned with Ferdinand. At the Duchess's palace, Antonio confides in Delio that the Duchess has had 2 more children. Antonio fears Ferdinand already knows, because his behavior has been watchful. The people of Malfi whisper that the Duchess is immoral, but no one suspects her marriage. Ferdinand arrives and tells his sister he has chosen Count Malatest as a new husband for her. She tries to defend her honor, but he refuses to listen. After she leaves, Ferdinand presses Bosola for information. Bosola reports the rumor of 3 illegitimate children but claims not to know the father. He hands Ferdinand a stolen key to the Duchess's bedroom. Ferdinand accepts it without revealing his intentions, delighted that Bosola speaks frankly rather than flattering him. In her chamber, the Duchess and Antonio tease each other affectionately before he and Cariola step out so she can prepare for bed. As she muses aloud on love and fear, Ferdinand slips into the room. He gives her a knife and tells her to unalive herself, then demands that she hide her husband's identity at all costs, to the point of cutting out her own tongue. She protests her innocence that she remarried like many widows. Ferdinand declares her reputation ruined and storms out. Antonio returns with Cariola. He interrogates Cariola with a gun but protests her innocence. The Duchess explains what happened. When Bosola knocks, Antonio slips away. To protect him, the Duchess invents a story that Antonio falsified her accounts, forcing him to flee Malfi to Ancona. She orders Bosola to arrest him publicly. When the officers arrive, she scolds Antonio for show but lets him leave freely, banishing him from the court. After the officers go, Bosola remarks that they once flattered Antonio and now betray him. He praises Antonio's virtues so warmly that the Duchess, moved by his sincerity, reveals that Antonio is her husband. Bosola pretends admiration and agrees to help her send money to Antonio in Ancona. Once she leaves, he admits he will report everything to Ferdinand in hopes of a reward. Back in Rome, the cardinal listens to Count Malatest boast about fortifications at Naples. Ferdinand enters with Delio, Silvio, and Pescara. Delio and Silvio mock Malatest as a coward who studies war but never fights. Bosola arrives and is ushered aside by Ferdinand and the cardinal. The others watch the brothers' faces grow angry as Bosola reveals the Duchess's escape. She is traveling to meet Antonio in Ancona under the guise of a pilgrimage and Cariola had warned her not to do so. The cardinal vows to have them driven out of Ancona, and Ferdinand begins planning how to intercept the Duchess. At the shrine of Our Lady of Loreto, the cardinal ceremonially lays aside his cardinal's hat so he may act as a soldier. The Duchess, Antonio, and their children arrive but are immediately banished from Ancona. The moment is shown silently, like a grim tableau, while churchmen sing. When they leave, two pilgrims explain that the Pope, prodded by the cardinal, has stripped the Duchess of her dukedom. Near Loreto, after their banishment, the Duchess and Antonio lament their fall from power. Bosola brings a letter from Ferdinand, written in double-edged language that pretends friendship while threatening murder. The Duchess sees through it at once. Antonio refuses to go to Ferdinand. Sensing danger, the Duchess urges him to take their eldest son to Milan. After the farewell, Antonio and the boy depart. Bosola soon returns with armed men to arrest the Duchess and her remaining family. He urges her to forget her low-born husband, but she rejects the insult, insisting a man's worth lies in his actions, not his title. She and her household are taken back to Malfi as captives. To Ferdinand's irritation, Bosola reports that the imprisoned Duchess remains patient and noble. Furious that she refuses to break, Ferdinand storms off. When the Duchess enters, Bosola explains that Ferdinand will speak to her but, because he once swore never to see her face again, she must meet him in total darkness. Bosola leaves, and Ferdinand steps in. In the pitch-black room, before leaving Ferdinand gives her a dead man's hand whose finger wears her wedding ring that the cardinal pried off her in Act 3, Scene 4. Bosola returns, relighting the chamber to reveal a horrific tableau of wax figures of Antonio and her children, arranged to look like corpses. This is a cruel illusion meant to push her toward madness. Ferdinand, watching her steady composure, vows to torment her further. He plans to bring lunatics from the local asylum and lodge them outside her cell. Bosola objects, but Ferdinand silences him. The next scene begins with the Duchess asking Cariola about the terrible noises outside made by Ferdinand's wild consort of madmen, sent to break her spirit. A servant confirms their arrival. 8 madmen enter, each representing some twisted version of an astrologer, a priest, a lawyer, a doctor, a tailor, a farmer, an usher, and a broker. They sing, ramble, and babble in grotesque, nightmarish fragments like the astrologer complaining his pillow is stuffed with porcupines, the lawyer muttering nonsense, the priest spouting blasphemies. After a strange dance, they leave. Bosola appears disguised as an old tomb-maker. He and the Duchess exchange somber reflections on death. She speaks with awareness that her end is near. Executioners enter carrying ropes, a coffin, and a bell. The Duchess faces them without fear. She meets her death with courage. Soon after, Cariola and her children are strangled as well. Ferdinand enters to view the deaths he ordered, but he lashes out wildly, shifting between rage, remorse, and self-pity. Bosola, witnessing this unraveling and feeling the weight of his own actions, begins to repent. Once Ferdinand leaves, the Duchess briefly revives. In this final flicker of life, Bosola comforts her that Antonio is alive, and the wax corpses were staged to deceive her. She dies moments later. In a Milanese public square, Delio warns Antonio that the cardinal and Ferdinand's offer of peace is surely a trap. When the Marquis of Pescara arrives, Antonio hides. Delio asks Pescara to return some of Antonio's stolen land, but Pescara refuses. Julia arrives with a letter from the cardinal requesting the same land, and Pescara grants it to her without hesitation, saying that property taken so shamefully should not be given to a friend, but is suitable for an immoral woman. He mentions that Ferdinand has arrived in Milan and seems to be slipping into madness. When he leaves, Antonio emerges from hiding and tells Delio that he will face the cardinal that night, even if it means meeting his death. In Cardinal and Ferdinand's residence, Ferdinand's doctor explains that Ferdinand believes himself to be a wolf and wanders graveyards at night digging up corpses. His condition has improved slightly, but a relapse is likely. Ferdinand enters, wild and unstable, attacking his own shadow. After he exits, the cardinal makes up a story of seeing a ghost that prompted Ferdinand's insanity. He denies any role in the Duchess's death and tells Bosola he will be rewarded if he kills Antonio. Once the cardinal leaves, Julia bursts in with a gun, believing Bosola bewitched her into loving him. He denies the accusation, and convinces her to spy on the cardinal. Hidden nearby, Bosola overhears the cardinal confessing to murdering his sister. The cardinal poisons Julia by making her kiss a poisoned Bible. When Bosola confronts him, the cardinal repeats his promise of reward if Bosola kills Antonio. Before leaving, Cardinal gives Bosola his room's key to remove Julia's body after dark. Bosola admits to himself that he intends instead to protect Antonio or help him avenge the Duchess. In the next scene, Antonio and Delio stand near the cardinal's palace, listening to the strange echo from the Duchess's tomb repeating Antonio's words. Antonio refuses Delio's pleas to stay away from the cardinal. He says he is already half dead, he may as well risk the rest. In the cardinal's house, the cardinal, pretending concern for Ferdinand's unstable mind, orders Pescara, Malatesta, Roderigo, and Griselin not to respond to any shouts or cries they may hear. His real aim is to ensure privacy while he disposes of Julia's body. Once everyone leaves, he reveals his plan to kill Bosola after Bosola kills Antonio. Bosola enters and he has overheard everything. Ferdinand appears, muttering about strangling someone, and Bosola assumes he means him. When Antonio and a servant approach, Bosola, terrified, strikes first and fatally wounds Antonio. As he dies, Antonio learns the truth of his family's fate. Bosola, shattered by what he has done, orders the servant to move the body to Julia's chamber. In a different room, the cardinal enters alone, tormented by his guilt. Bosola arrives with Antonio's body and declares he has come to kill him. The cardinal tries shouting for help and bribery, but Bosola remains resolute. Above them, Pescara, Malatesta, Roderigo, and Griselin swore not to respond to any cries when they heard the cardinal calling, because of his earlier instructions. Only Pescara suspects the danger is real, so the men go to the cardinal. Bosola wounds the cardinal, avenging the Duchess and Antonio. Ferdinand enters in a frenzy, mistakenly attacks the cardinal, then stabs Bosola. Bosola kills Ferdinand before falling. When the others arrive, the cardinal tries to shift blame onto Ferdinand, but dies moments later. Bosola confesses to accidentally killing Antonio, and then he too dies. Delio enters with Antonio and the Duchess's eldest son, the lone survivor of that family. The remaining nobles promise to safeguard the boy's future. Let's thematically analyze the Duchess of Malfi. The Duchess treated certain religious gestures as superstition. When Bosola proposes that she disguise her escape as a pilgrimage, she agrees readily, but Cariola warns her not to jest sacred things. The Duchess shrugs this off, calling Cariola a superstitious fool. But Duchess met imprisonment, torture, and death with a calm that felt otherworldly. What frightens everyone else in the play never seems to terrify her. As she is led to her execution, she holds her dignity close, asking for death like it might put her to sleep. For her, death offers release from her brother's cruelty and the tightening net of their control. Her death also lets the play dwell on the strange permanence of the dead. Her voice rises again in an echo meant to warn Antonio, suggesting that the spirit can outlast the body. Part of her serenity comes from her conviction that she will see her loved ones in the next life. Her final spoken word is mercy. As her suffering increased, the Duchess saw the world itself as infernal. She believes her family to be dead already, and describes the earth as if it were made of flaming sulfur. When Bosola insists she must cling to life, she replies that hell is already here. The fourth act drags that hell into plain sight with the fake corpses, the severed hand, the screaming madman, and the murders of the Duchess and her children. The brothers unleash this violence out of greed for her fortune and pride in their own bloodline. Both brothers are repeatedly tied to the devil. Antonio says the devil speaks in the cardinal voice. Bosola sees Ferdinand's manipulation. The hell they create devours them. Ferdinand collapses into madness, and the cardinal dies stripped of the reputation he guarded so fiercely. Ferdinand imagines horrors and imagery steeped in burning, the Duchess's children lighted like a match, bodies baked so tightly no smoke escapes. He is repeatedly linked to flame, sulfur, and salamanders, creatures once believed to live in fire. Ferdinand, for all his religiosity, twists religion into a weapon. In Act 2, he answers the news of the Duchess's child by branding her a sister damned. He chooses revenge over compassion and damnation over forgiveness. He tortures her sister by giving her a knife to unalive herself, meets her in darkness, lodges madmen in her vicinity, presents her a severed hand wearing a wedding ring and imprisons her till her execution. His cruelty toward the Duchess seems partly rooted in his own incestuous desire for her. That desire, tangled with pride and rage, deforms him inwardly. Even the cardinal is shocked by the brutality of his fantasies. Ferdinand tells himself that heaven is using the Duchess to avenge the brother's sins, and in his final dialogues, he suggests that each of us is destroyed by our own wrongdoing. The moment he sees the Duchess's body, shame begins to consume him, and soon the guilt drives him mad. He is diagnosed with lycanthropy or werewolf syndrome, a belief that he has become a wolf, and he prowls and attacks shadows as though trying to tear apart the crime he has committed. The wolf symbolizes savagery and violence. It becomes the emblem for Ferdinand, whose nature is already feral and unpredictable. He becomes outwardly what he has always been inwardly, predatory, dangerous, blood-driven. In Act 3, Scene 2, Ferdinand insults his sister. In Act 4, Scene 2, he rationalizes the Duchess's children's murder. After the Duchess's murder, Ferdinand imagines to Daniel de Bassola that a wolf will dig up her grave, exposing the crime. In Act 5, Scene 2, the doctor describes him wandering a graveyard at midnight, howling, and carrying a man's leg on his shoulder. Ferdinand's madness is the shape his guilt takes. It is guilt turned inside out. The cardinal cloaks his ambition in the language of religion and hypocritically declares that the Duchess makes religion her riding hood. He banishes the Duchess beside a shrine in a grotesque parody of spiritual authority. He lives lavishly, keeps a mistress, and uses his ecclesiastical power for personal advantage. Once he kills Julia, guilt disturbs him so much that he can't pray. He meditates on hell like a scholar who suddenly realizes his own foot is already on the threshold. Ferdinand, lost in his madness, mistakes the cardinal for the devil and stabs him, an image of guilt returning to claim its maker. The cardinal loses his life and his reputation. His bitterness toward the Duchess is rooted in fear that she has stained the family's noble name. By the time he dies, their family's reputation is in ruins, and he begs to be erased entirely. De Leo confirms that this wish will be granted, for the brothers' corruption has left nothing worthy of remembrance. Bassola, too, is trapped in guilt. He acts out of obedience to the Duke, and afterwards Bassola is tormented by the harm he has caused. Eventually he tries to correct his wrongs. But tragically, he accidentally kills Antonio, ruining his last chance at redemption. He manages to kill the brothers, when Ferdinand wildly stabs the cardinal. When Bassola dies, he accepts that he has at least helped dismantle the monstrous world he served. His final speech is steeped in the darkness he helped spread, suggesting that remorse alone can't undo what has been done. The Duchess of Malfi is set in Roman Catholic Italy, a place English Renaissance audiences often imagined as elegant on the surface but rotten underneath. Webster leans into that stereotype from the start. In Act 1, Scene 1, Antonio returns from the French court and praises France as a model of good rule. He describes the French king as having cleared his court of flattering sycophants and infamous persons. Antonio says, "The court is like a common fountain. If the water at the source is clean, the whole nation benefits, but if it is poisoned at the top, the poison spreads everywhere." France is healthy because its nobles are brave enough to speak honestly to the king, warning him of corruption before it festers. In contrast, the Italian court is ruled by Duke Ferdinand and the Cardinal, two brothers who present themselves as principled men but are inwardly devious and corrupt. Ferdinand is tyrannical and violent, the Cardinal is cold and calculating, secretly employing murderers and keeping Julia, a married woman, as his mistress. They obsess over their sister's wealth and forbid her from remarrying. The Cardinal sabotages rivals, surrounds himself with flatterers, spies, 1,000 such political monsters. He tries to bribe his way into the papacy. His hypocrisy is theatrical. He mocks the very idea of a faithful woman, but carries on an affair with Julia. Later he murders Julia with a poisoned Bible, an act that sums up his grotesque inversion of spiritual authority. Ferdinand hides cruelty behind courtly manners, but relies heavily on spies to do his work. In Act 1, he persuades the Duchess to hire Bosola as her horsemaster solely so Bosola can spy on her. Delio compares Ferdinand to a spider spinning a web of laws around himself, laws he twists for his own protection and to entrap enemies. Through their network of informants, the brothers uncover the Duchess's secret marriage and children. Using their unchecked power, they murder her and her family. Only after she dies does Ferdinand admit his misuse of justice, but by then he is already sliding into madness. Before the play starts, Bosola has already been the cardinal's assassin. Now he serves Ferdinand as a spy in the Duchess's house. He devises the apricot trick to expose her pregnancy, betrays her secrets to the brothers, and carries out the executions of the Duchess, her maid, and her children. Throughout, he broods over death and decay, and tries to soften his guilt by imagining her murder as a lawful act, comparing himself to a bellman announcing an execution ordered by a judge. Ferdinand quickly shatters this illusion, reminding him that the Duchess has been killed without any legal authority at all, and Bosola agrees. Only when that corrupt, lawless system starts working against him does Bosola fully see how monstrous it is. The Cardinal, Ferdinand, and Bosola constantly disguise their intentions. Even the virtuous, Antonio, Delio, and the Duchess must resort to deception to survive. Delio suggests the Duchess and Antonio pretend that Bosola's apricots were poisoned. The Duchess accuses Antonio of embezzlement to draw attention away from her secret marriage, and she agrees to Bosola's idea of a fake pilgrimage to mask her escape. The brothers' schemes bring them small victories for a time, but they ultimately destroy everyone involved. The play ends with courts emptied, power positions unfilled, and the final dialogue spoken not by a noble figure but by a simple courier. Let's discuss the play's symbolism. In Act 1, Ferdinand asks who took the ring oftenest in the jousting contest, meaning, who guided his lance through the prize ring most successfully. He learns that Antonio Bologna won. This moment foreshadows that later Antonio receives the Duchess's ring. The ring becomes a symbol of their marriage, vow of loyalty, and Antonio's earned worth. In Act 3, Scene 4, the Cardinal angrily tears the Duchess's ring away, turning a sacred sign of union into an insult. The degradation deepens in Act 4, Scene 1, when a ring appears on the hand of what seems to be Antonio's corpse, a staged torment meant to break the Duchess. Ferdinand calls the ring a love token, twisting the symbol into cruelty. In Act 4, Scene 2, the executioner mocks Cariola by holding up the noose and telling her, "Here's your wedding ring," corrupting the symbol of commitment and turning it into a threat of death. Blood represents violence, family, and rank. The murders are described as bloody to show its brutality and stress that members of the same family and blood are killing one another. Blood also symbolizes lineage and social status. When the brothers kill the Duchess, they spill the noble blood that is also their sister, making their crime doubly monstrous. Ferdinand's dying speech draws on blood as violence, family, and passion, connecting to early modern medical beliefs about the four humors. The Cardinal treats blood in strictly legal and aristocratic terms. He fears the Duchess's children because they taint the purity of their family line. Ferdinand misreads him entirely and takes blood to mean bodily heat and sexual impulse, thinking of cupping glasses and physical treatments. The Cardinal's understanding of blood is cold and strategic, but Ferdinand's is heated, visceral, and violent. Do like and share.